Nothing, guys. No music this week. I overslept, and so you're lucky you're getting show at all. In a you know manner of a fashion or whatever.
Hope you like it, you ungrateful bastards.
Yeah, right out of the gate, our first guest is the author of Quiet Places, and he happens to be joining us on a show called The Quiet Place.
Who'd have thunk?
In the same year where a movie called A Quiet Place is also a thing. There's a lot of quiet places. This is a thing.
In fact, somebody actually left a review on Amazon complaining that the plot of my book was nothing like the movie.
Oh, what a simp! I believe that person would fall under the heading of or the classification of a non-playable character.
Yeah,
I would say so. Yes.
NPC. Yeah. What
this
was that?
novelization by Hubert Selby Jr. is nothing like the Tommy Wiseau movie.
So Jasper Bark, you are here speaking, somewhat on behalf of your publisher, Crystal Lake Publishing.
I sometimes work as a spokesperson for them. I've actually been published by Crystal Lake from the very beginning. Very first thing they ever did was an anthology called For the Night is Dark, and I was in that. And that anthology was far more successful than Joe Meinhardt, who is the evil mastermind behind the Crystal Lake Empire, were expected. And after a few more books, he was able to quit his job as a teacher and go full-time. And over the last 7 years, he's actually grown Crystal Lake into one of the leading independent publishers of dark fiction and horror.
And it's run out of South Africa, is that right?
Yeah, he lives in a little town called Bloemfontein.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. So is he a one-man operation, or does he have other people that help him out that live in different geographies?
It's fascinating. He actually employs people from all over the English-speaking world. So he's got guys in Australia. He has people from Europe. He has people from the UK, and he has people over in the States working with him on an associate basis. And he's able to provide a livelihood for a lot of people and pay really good royalties to a lot of authors as well.
That is good to hear.
What's the percentage on those royalties?
What do you mean the percentage on the royalties?
Well, when I say there's always people often get this slightly wrong in indie publishing. Mainstream publishing pays you royalties at the point of sale. So every time your book is sold in a bookshop, Barnes and Nobles, you get a small cut of the percentage. A lot of indie publishers like Crystal Lake actually give you a cut of the profits, which is slightly different from a royalty payment. So depending on hard copies and ebooks, you get anywhere from 45% upwards of the actual sale of the actual profits of every single one of the books that are sold. So there's a lot of really fabulous reasons to be published by Crystal Lake, not least the care and attention they take, making certain your work is of the highest quality before it hits the bookshelves. But also the fact that you get a full share in the profits of all your hard work, far more than you would get actually with a mainstream publisher. I've been published by indie and by mainstream publishers, and Crystal Lake are probably the favorite people I've worked with.
Okay. It's funny. It seems like author Brian Keene spends so much time going after anyone who publishes authors in the horror genre. I just wonder, it's like you guys are the publisher that got away, which is a good thing. I mean, it's like you're one of the few publishers that he has not tried to, whose character he has not tried to smear or assassinate. And I'm not trying to put you in the spot where you have to comment, and against Brian Keene. I'm just saying. So it's like you guys must really know your shit, to be armored up, from that possibility. So.
Thank you. I mean, in Brian's defense, it's difficult because if you've been published for any length of time, if you've been doing it, then you've been seriously shafted by a whole host of publishers. And there was a big diaspora in the noughties where a lot of us left mainstream publishing, where you'd get good advances, but you'd get treated really, really badly at the back end. You'd make almost no money once your book was out there. To going to independent publishers who promised loads of editorial freedom and lots of profits. And unfortunately, a lot of them couldn't deliver on that promise. The best will in the world, they couldn't. So people like Brian have really had the sharp end of publishing. I would hope the reason I believe actually Crystal Lake have published one or two of his short stories in their amazing anthology series. But I would hope one of the reasons that he hasn't had a go at Crystal Lake is because they genuinely do look after their authors. They genuinely are very, very fair, and they're quite scrupulous about that.
Cool.
And the other great thing about them is the fact that they work with people of Brian Keene's level, and they work with people of Clive Barker and Joe Hill's level. They're actually at that status where they can publish those people, but they are continually looking for new blood. Just recently, they were open for submission. They got a huge record number, thousands of people sent novels in, and they went through all of them, and they're actually able to launch the careers of two new authors, Nick Roberts and Faith Pierce, who are two exciting new signings that they're quite keen on. But they run things like the Shallow Waters Flash Fiction Anthology, which is open to any author of any standard or any ability. You don't even have to be published. And if you win this, you not only become a published author, you actually get paid proper top industry level pay. So you automatically become a top paid published author just by taking part in these competitions. They're anthologies as well. They, on the one hand, they're encouraging fresh new talent and people who often are appearing in print for the first time alongside some huge name authors, which is an opportunity that you rarely get at an entry level. And even if you're not quite ready to be published yet, if you think you've got stories in you, but you don't quite know how to put it on the page, you keep getting, you're sending stuff out, but nobody's replying, or everybody's just rejecting you with form letters. They also run on their Patreon account a mentor service, or they'll hook you up with top industry standard editors who will take you through the finer points of writing and let you know where you're going wrong, what you need to improve, and they'll help you reach that level you need to get to actually become a professional standard. So it's the great thing about them is they build a community, and it's a community of people who are I sort of think I'm of technical difficulties. Am I still on?
No. I pulled that up on the
Patreon page, which is I'm involved with Crystal Lake. I'm not actually on Patreon, but they let you do everything from vote on the winners of all their story competitions. There's some amazing perks you won't get anywhere else. Some amazing experiences you can have by being a member of their Patreon, which include all kinds of completely exclusive content, online interviews with authors, loads and loads of writing tips, and also an exclusive exposure to authors of the highest caliber. Oh, and there's that idiot there making a making a plea for your money, begging you. At that particular point, I have to add, although I am actually begging you to join their Patreon, they did have my wife and children locked in a closet, so I had to do it.
So yeah, put us over, or the kid gets it. The wife and kid get it.
Pretty much. And in their defense, actually, I did have a very quiet weekend to myself, which kind of was a bit of a bonus.
There's a blurb here from the late Jack Ketchum. So apparently, yeah, these guys are well esteemed in the horror community. This is probably a hard. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Dallas Mayer, who publishes Jack Ketchum, was a fabulous mentor to so many people, and he was a really good friend to Joe and to Crystal Lake Publishing while he was alive. His loss was very, very keenly felt for all of us at Crystal Lake Publishing, not just from the fact that he produced amazing fiction, but he was a fantastic human being as well.
Yeah, pretty shocking, especially for those of us, who were just readers who did not know that he was ill. Just
He kept it very quiet, very close to his chest.
yeah. What I liked about Ketchum, not to get off, on a, into the thickets, into the weeds, but what I liked about Ketchum's style is his ability to really vicariously experience the guilt and regrets and anxieties of someone who has committed murder. I mean, I think he lets it hit home about as realistically as it could possibly be without actually having experienced it, because the moment to moment anxieties, how you have to basically think 10 steps ahead of anyone who's the slightest bit suspicious, towards you, or, I mean, it really, I mean, it's very believable, to a point it's uncomfortable to see how, well he writes first time murderers.
Oh man, absolutely. It was interesting. One of his close friends, Richard Lehman, once said that horror authors are experts in worst case scenarios. And I think Jack Ketchum really typifies that. And the way also that his work touches you on deeper levels than just scaring you. You run the entire gamut of emotions in books like The Girl Next Door, or Off Season, or Offspring, or The Woman. Totally just like hits you in the chest and twists that knife.
Yeah, I really like how he built this this lore, up about these tribes of cannibals who were just barely hanging on, for the most lowest tier of existence of survival. As society, modern society, kept encroaching further and further to where they didn't have hardly any spaces left to hide. And I really like how he brought that out and was able to revisit that repeatedly. But yeah, I mean, Jack Ketchum's awesome. I mean, what else needs to be said there? Like I said, I'm just now starting Quiet Places, your tale of cosmic horror, and what do you think you bring to the table as far as cosmic horror? Would you say you're more in line with a Laird Barron or John Langan, or are you more in the vein of I don't know, Legate or Lovecraft?
That's an interesting question, and you're never, as an author, it's very, very difficult to have the self-knowledge to be able to honestly answer that about your work. A lot of people have likened Quiet Places, which is one of my few non-gory. I tend to be a little bit more in the Ketchum, Lehman, Edward Lee camp. A lot of my work is often quite erotic, quite gory. Quiet Places is slightly more quiet horror. It is much more in the line. I've likened very much to John Langan's work, that particular book, and also Algernon Blackwood. What I hope I bring to cosmic horror is a very twisted imagination. My work's also likened to people like Clive Barker and Lovecraft, and I think the connection is the fact that those two individuals have this amazing, gobsmacking visionary horror that just extends the kind of horizon of what horror can do. I'm not saying my work is of a comparable nature, but that's what I aspire to do. And certainly, I think if you read my work, you'll read things you haven't quite read before in horror. I'm not just rehearsing the old standard tropes and the same old monsters. I think I will definitely show you something you haven't seen before.
What can you give an example of something that you think is like groundbreaking about your not that you're carving yourself, but just something that you had never read before that you could say, hey, I got there first.
I would hope you'd find that most of my work, whether it's stories like I have a story it's become quite notorious and follows me around wherever I go, called Stuck on You, which spawned a urban legend, and it's about a guy who picks up what he thinks is a drug mule driving over the border into Arizona from Mexico, and she's basically offering him a ride for a ride. He takes her out into the wilderness, and as they're actually right in the middle of going at it as hard as you possibly can, it's quite full on erotic. They're struck by lightning. Lightning passes through him, kills her. He wakes up from being unconscious and discovers that she's actually, the muscles of her vagina have clamped shut, and he can no longer remove himself. And he's got all this scarred tissue. He's connected to her body, and he's miles away from his car or any mobile phone, and he has to crawl through the forest with this dead corpse attached to his penis before he gets. And that, believe it or not, that's the beginning of his hardship. That's kind of never been done before. On the other scale, a lot of my works are concerned with an ancient heresy called the Sadik heresy, which is a religion which possibly predates the human race.
What is it? What is it, though?
It's called the Sadik heresy. Again, it's one of these words that's very difficult to describe because it possibly comes from a pre-human language. And going back as far as we know, even in ancient Mesopotamia, the birthplace of civilization, the Sadik heresy was considered to be an ancient heresy from before the dawn of time that was so unspeakable that any sects that practiced it or disseminated its knowledge were automatically persecuted. And this has kind of continued down through history in small, tiny pockets. And it's given birth to unspeakable blasphemies and abominations.
I'm at a loss as to how to spell that.
Q-U apostrophe R-R-M-S-A-D-D-I-C, Sadik. And actually, the Sadik heresy is mentioned in Quiet Places. That's one of the pieces of cosmic horror. And again, I don't want to give away too much about the things you'll discover in my work that you may not have read elsewhere, because a lot of it, the joy of reading it, I would hope, is in the surprise and you start out. A lot of my reviews tend to say, I started this book going, oh yes, I know where this is going. And then 40 pages in, I was going, what? I have never read anything like this before, which is one of my favorite quotes to get from reviewers. And it's one I've had quite a lot. So I can blindside you as a reader and take you to places you won't quite expect.
That sounds good to me. So this was I'm not going to be able to pronounce this correctly.
Sadik, I think that's how you pronounce it. Sadik heresy. Q-U apostrophe.
But is that something that you created out of whole cloth, or is this something that actually existed back in a historical record that you've expanded upon?
This is difficult because there are online references to it, and the more that I deny actually having come up with it, the more people think I'm lying. But then again, also I'm known for being something of a literary trickster and something of a hoaxer. So some people think I came up with it completely. Other people, because there's an inordinate framework of references which you can discover online and offline that appear in my work, some other people believe that it actually is just something that I've written about and discovered. So I've got to the point now whereby if I start telling people I came up with it, they don't believe me. If I deny it and say, no, it's totally fictional, they don't believe me either. So I kind of just raise an enigmatic eyebrow.
Okay.
Sadik. I like the way that's musical almost. Sadik. I mean, where can I find that Stuck on You story? Because I mean that's I went all up in that story.
It's actually, two places. It's actually just recently Crystal Lake made it completely free as an ebook, so you can go and download it from Amazon. I think it's no longer exclusive, so you can probably get it for Nook and from Barnes and Noble, all those places. Or it's the lead story in the first book I actually had published by Crystal Lake, which is Stuck on You and Other Prime Cuts.
Here it is. Yep, free. But yeah, I'm sure that collection's pretty awesome. I might just
go ahead and treat yourself.
I might go ahead and snag that. But geez, would the wound technically be cauterized already because of the lightning, or
weirdly? You would have. I did actually. It's one of these strange things as a horror writer. If ever I'm setting off alarms at the NSA, or some guy kicks in the door of my study where I am at the moment and goes through my search history, I have a lot of explaining to do. You go to some very, very strange places as a horror author. So I did spend time actually looking at burn victims and people who have been struck by lightning. Interestingly, my father, when he was a young man, was also struck by lightning. It leaves a kind of strange scar tissue, and it looks almost like a fern, like an underwater fern pattern on the body, as the electrical discharge like crackles through the body. You can imagine, and actually leaves it. So at the point of impact, it's almost cauterized, and then the rest of the body will be slightly raw and it'll be kind of like a third degree burn.
Oh, it turns out I already had Stuck on You for Kindle, oddly enough. But so we wouldn't have to worry about that anyway. But I imagine there's still a threat of going septic if he's stuck in there too long, you know.
Absolutely. And of course, he can't get off a corpse, which is beginning to rot. At first, he's been unconscious for a while, so rigor mortis is setting in, which makes the body difficult to move. And then when the rigor mortis goes out, it's like trying to push a giant kind of blob of 200-pound jelly with your penis up a slope as you're crawling through woodland. And there are bears and other predators and things in this woodland as well. So,
and every little moist, feeling or excretion, he could be thinking, "Oh God, have the maggots started, burrowing in yet? I mean, oh God, what was that?" Well, I mean, hey, you put the image in my head, man.
Yeah, that's because these things get stuck in my head. And this is the wonderful thing about being horror fans, is all these dark thoughts that fester away at the back of just about everybody's subconscious. We have a safe place to put these, to explore the anxieties, and to explore the darker sides of our own nature. It's a safe and it's a healthy place to put them. And I think actually it makes us better human beings, because we can not only admit there are these sides to our character, but we can explore them without necessarily having to take an axe to our neighbor, or the guy who cut us off at the junction, at the intersection.
Where are you stationed at right now? Anyway, what?
I'm in the wilds of West England, so I'm not. I live in a little weaver's cottage in
Wales.
Just near to Wales. I actually live very, very close to Stonehenge.
I thought I could hear Welsh.
Glastonbury.
I thought I could hear Welsh in your accent.
My accent's kind of strange. I come from gypsy stock, so I've lived all over the United Kingdom. So when I was born in the Midlands, but I grew up north, where everybody talks kind of like the wildlings in Game of Thrones. So I would have had this sort of accent when I was younger, but I don't want to talk like that because my wife's very posh. She's like the aristocracy. So I've undergone the technical term is the process of emposhification.
Oh.
So, but I live out in rural England, and people have been living in the little town I live in since Anglo-Saxon times. And there's monoliths and ancient crumbling Roman ruins around the place, and Anglo-Saxon churches. It's a fabulous place as a Gothic horror author.
Thatched roofs with the moss like growing up over, and I can already picture it in my head. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I live in an 18th century. This is actually I'm in a purposefully built office at the bottom of our yard, our backyard. But my house is an 18th century weaver's cottage. It actually was built in 1750.
Wow, you're way too cultured for this show. But so this must have been a hard year for you and Crystal Lake authors in general, publishers, not being able to make the convention circuit and whatnot.
That's been a real kicker. And I think the real kicker is not so much on a commercial basis. It's losing that touch with a sense of community. And I think the genre world has got a real strong community, but I personally feel that the horror lovers have got the best community of any of the genres. And just not being able to go out and see all those faces. The Horror Writers of America Association were due to come here to the UK, and there were so many people with whom I'm really friendly online, so many authors I count as friends and colleagues who I was so excited to see. And then unfortunately, it was all called off at the last minute because of COVID. Luckily, though, I think a lot of first-time readers are coming to particularly post-apocalyptic fiction because, frankly, we're kind of living through the apocalypse. So it's kind of those of us who've been reading this stuff and watching these movies for like the past few decades, we're kind of schooled in how to survive this. And I think there's a lot of noobs coming in going, what do I do? How do I do? Where are the rules? Well, we've been writing them for decades.
Everybody's looking for a roadmap. Yeah.
And in hard times, weirdly, people like reading horror fiction. Sales of horror fiction go up, and people have bought more books because there's only so many Netflix box sets that you can binge watch. Eventually, you think, I might as well pick up my Kindle or buy a book. So it's not been too bad. It's not been a bad time. I just got a nice royalty statement from Crystal Lake actually early today, so that kind of adds to the Christmas shopping bill for me. So I think the really, really hard thing is making the personal connection with all those friends and the readers that we've made out in the world of horror publishing. Not being able to make that personal connection, put a name to a face, to press the flesh. That's what's really been missed, I think, this year.
Where did you start like cutting your teeth as far as cosmic horror? Sure, I mean, everybody has their roots in, say, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and maybe a handful of horror movies that they glimpsed as a wee lad. But what cosmic horror in particular did you first cut your teeth on? Would you say William Hope Hodgson, House on the Borderland, Algernon Blackwood? You mentioned him, the Willows, stuff like that.
That stuff I came to a little bit later. Personally, that kind of two places I would have first experienced horror and cosmic horror. First would have been comics. I'm a huge comics fan, particularly horror comics. That was probably, as a very, very, very young child, my first proper exposure to really good horror. It would have been people like Marvel Comics did lots of adaptations in their black and white horror series. And also Warren Comics, most of which I would probably have shoplifted because I don't think the guys running the newsstands probably would have allowed a kind of like 7 or 8 year old kid. So I think I was slightly light-fingered. I probably pilfered a few, and that was my first exposure. And then a little bit later on from that, I discovered the work of Robert Bloch, who's the author of Psycho. But before he wrote Psycho and lots of psychological horror, he was a disciple of H.P. Lovecraft. And through Bloch, I discovered Lovecraft, which slightly blew my mind. It was difficult to read for a young 12, 13-year-old because his language is very challenging. But also, his ideas are just so mind-blowing, which is what I loved about cosmic horror. And from reading Lovecraft, obviously I read people like Clark Ashton Smith and Frank Belknap Long. And then from reading them, I then went and discovered what their influences were, which would be, as you've mentioned, William Hope Hodgson, Arthur Machen was another huge influence on Lovecraft, Algernon Blackwood, who's just astonishing author, and even M.R. James.
Now, what did M.R. James write? The Purple.
M.R. James is probably one of the greatest ghost story writers who's ever lived. He was a Cambridge Don. Cambridge is a major big Ivy League university. It's one of the best universities in the world, and he was just a very fusty old Don who had this fascination with gore and horror stories. And to amuse his students every Christmas, he'd write a horror story, and they got to be so popular he eventually offered them to a publisher, and they brought them out in a collection of ghost stories, it was called, and they became tremendously popular. And he published 4 of these, and so famous stories of his are things like "Oh, Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad," "The Ash Tree," "A Warning to the Curious." And he kind of set the ground rules that the modern ghost story and a lot of modern cosmic horror is actually based on. And he's still massively influential on authors like John Langan, will be a good example, Ramsey Campbell, Adam Neville, are authors who owe him a massive debt. And you could go on for hours. Robert Aikman, Thomas Ligotti owes a great stylistic debt also to M.R. James. And if you've never read any stuff, it's great. It's really fusty, old Victorian horror that's got this really gruesome undertone. And it's all hinted at, but because it's all hinted at, it's actually really quite horrific. What he's actually, he's never directly stating it. He's just playing with the imagination and taking it to very dark places. And the way he builds and structures a ghost story and slowly builds an atmosphere, it's a lesson to all of us who've come after him.
Okay, so as far as quiet places go, this woman is staying in the town of Dunballen or Dunballen.
Dunballen.
Okay. And
which is there? Yeah, she's moved up from London. She's fallen in love with a guy who's inherited a small parcel of land, and with it, the lairdship of a tiny, extremely remote town up in the Scottish Highlands. So it's playing with themes of folk horror, like you might find in films like The Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw, and also amazing books like Thomas Tryon's Harvest. And it's putting those into a UK Scottish setting, and it's introducing a big, healthy dose of cosmic horror. This town has a secret. There's a reason that the guy Andrew McStandish has been brought back, and he's going to face some pretty dark, quite unbelievable horrors that you won't quite have seen. And yeah, his partner is not going to stand for this. She wants to fight back. She wants to challenge the town and challenge the town's demand on her man. And in doing so, she unleashes some pretty large, quite unbelievable otherworldly forces.
Okay. You know, one thing that I've always wondered how authors might get around as we reach this gigantic plateau of, technology that just encroaches further on our lives all the time. It seems like there would reach a point where we're so saturated with technology, from nanotechnology to, the super surveillance society. Would there still be room for the supernatural?
That's a very, very good question. And fascinatingly enough, it's something I had to address in the book, because it's a lot easier to write about remote communities back in the 70s, when remote communities just kind of meant they didn't have television aerials or they didn't put in telephone lines. How do you address that? But there are actually places in certain parts of Europe which are almost black spots. I was kind of worried earlier on. My broadband was playing up. But actually, I've got a goat in a shed just around the back of here on a little treadmill, which is actually powering it. When she gets a bit tired, my bandwidth just goes. But there are actually places in the UK where it's very difficult to get phone reception. You actually have to walk several miles outside of town to get it.
I just want to be clear. That was a joke, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I don't know with people. Go ahead.
So you believe they had to go to a treadmill?
Yeah. I thought it might be you, Greg. Go ahead.
So there are tiny remote communities around where I live where you cannot get any. It's tremendously difficult. They actually haven't put in the lights to give you the broadband connection, and there's no cell towers around for miles. So you have to sometimes drive like 2 or 3 miles outside of town to actually get a signal on your phone. So I slightly expand this because the community has a very particular secret. It doesn't really want to join the 21st century. So the most connection it has is like the mail service and the odd newspaper coming in. So our particular heroine has great difficulty actually going online or even getting a phone reception. So she's very remote. And there are still small communities around the UK and other parts of Europe that actually are still that remote. Just.
Even now.
Even now.
It just seems like there's no more room for anyone to hide from this further encroachment of Uber technology. You just
I mean, I'm pretty sure that most humans aren't on the internet, right? I mean, as far as if you think about it globally, I think that most people aren't, right?
I don't know.
They probably are. I think 90% of the population probably has some access to it, I would think. But that in and of itself is probably a theme that horror authors can address.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively recent that India had widespread access to high speed internet, and they've got a huge swath of the population.
Well, that's almost like a Borg-like thing, isn't it? We're all being assimilated into this massive, giant Uber culture that's not that wants to homogenize the consciousness of the entire race. I mean, that right there is a horror theme.
Yeah, I mean, you've already seen a lot of pretty common internet-based horror, and it's stuff that actually is being written by people who understand the internet. It's just not it's just written by a boomer who thinks everyone on the internet wants to rape and kill you.
Well, there have been some basic attempts at writing technological horror in a modern context. But all of it is very, like I said, basic, and even though it's basic, it's also very try hard, unfriended.
It's up to 59% now globally. Folks have access, so 40% of the 59. Yeah.
I mean, it would seem like the supernatural force would have to be stronger to hijack any kind of, I would think that man would be able to combat the supernatural on a more effective,
rational
field than they would have in, say, even in the 90s. Now I would think they're on a more even playing field because they have transcended, to levels of technology that are bigger than really we probably have any right to. And I feel like the supernatural would really have to stay, on its the tips of its toes in order to keep up with man. But but
that's very true. But you can never overlook, and one of the joys about of horror is it kind of appeals to the ghost in the machine, and it also appeals to that kind of to the scared chimp in a cage at the back of our minds, which is our kind of basic human id, and that's the part of us that isn't really reachable by rationality. That's the part of us that would really like to think that the Earth is flat. It's the part of us that loves a good conspiracy theory. It's because we can get all anxious and the fascinating thing is that we'd like to think that the fact that now so much of the world's information is available at the touch of a button would actually enlighten us all and bring us about this wonderful age of information. And yet, basically, most of us use the internet for going online and arguing with strangers about whether this fictional character or that fictional character should have acted this way or shouldn't have acted in that way. So you can never overlook humankind's ability to seriously fuck things up.
I have a device in my pocket that gives me more access to knowledge than any ancient scholar could have ever dreamed of. I mostly use it to look at cat pictures and porn.
Yeah. Pictures of people's breasts.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, but yeah. So, and those are the dark areas that horror writers love. That's the kind of the seamy underbelly of humanity that's kind of our home, effectively.
Well, what would you say that the overwhelming amount of Crystal Lake offerings? What genre or subgenre would they fit into? Would you say?
The wonderful thing, Crystal Lake's published everything from fiction based on really excellent cult movies like Chud, through to incredibly literary authors like Gary McMahon. So I think the thing that denotes a Crystal Lake book for me is that it's going to be good fiction. It will cover everything from quiet horror to extreme horror and every type of subgenre you can imagine that's encompassed by the dark fiction world. But it's always of a really high caliber. They're a little bit like, it reminds me, there are certain labels who always bring out great bands and always produce good music. And even if you don't know the band, and even if you don't recognize the type of music they play, you know, because that label has brought it out, that you will enjoy it. Crystal Lake are one of those type of publishers. I've taken a shot on a lot of authors that I've never read before, and I've always been incredibly satisfied by my read, because Joe and the editorial team that he employs, Monique Snyman, Natching T. Casa, have got phenomenal taste. They really know good fiction. So they're always the kind of the super hipster friends of yours that are always just on the cutting edge. So that whenever you want to read something really good and you say, what have you got that's good? They'll always be able to hand you something that you will really enjoy.
Mm.
So that will be the main thing. Quality, I think, would be the thing that that really denotes this. The major thing that the major quality that Crystal Lake Fiction has is its work is always of very high quality.
You said that a lot of your peers. I don't know how long you've been at this, but you said a lot of your peers moved out of the mainstream publishing racket, and I assume you're referring to what, Zebra paperbacks, Leisure publishing?
Zebra, and they were fabulous, and also the Del Abyss line as well. And once upon a time, there was a place for mid-listers. We were the people who would make regular sales year on year in. You can pay your mortgage doing it. You're never going to get rich. You're never going to be in the Stephen King league. But you would sell year on year. And the more books you wrote and they're made in print, the more progressively you grow. I kind of come in at the very end of that. I didn't really start publishing until the mid-noughties. So even then, the kind of the mainstream fictional model was wobbling. And in those days, that was the main way to get published. And if people were self-publishing, then generally speaking, that was frowned upon because they were just doing it to feed their own vanity. They weren't going to get in bookshops. Amazon hadn't grown to be the behemoth that it is now. But a lot, so in the similar way, because they also write an awful lot in comics, and when there was the giant direct market revolution in the 1980s, it meant that there were a lot of more markets. There was a lot more shelf space for independent creators to get into the market. Similar revolution happened with the dawn of the ebook and with online sales. It opened up a huge market for a lot of very enterprising people with a huge degree of initiative to move into that and to produce an alternative to the mainstream. And for those of us who slipped out of the mainstream because we were never at the top of the sales ranks, it gave us a new home and a new way to continue to make a living doing this.
Yeah.
And don't you miss things like the Leisure Book Club and those old amazing Zebra paperbacks with the skeletons on every single cover. Skeletons doing the most ridiculous things, pushing prams and dangling from Christmas trees.
But for some reason, it was
great
really,
products, great looking products.
It was really attractive. For whatever reason, the skeletons really moved some units in the 80s. But the cover artists really made skeletons look sexy. I don't know what that says, but no, I mean, sexy as in, like cool imagery as well.
Yeah.
But that was a thing, man. Skeletons on every cover. And then they experimented with the holographic covers for a while. It was a gimmick, but I mean,
Yeah, I remember that. And the fact, it's interesting these days. There's a good side and a bad side. If you bought and read horror fiction in those days, you kind of almost had to kind of wrap it in brown paper if you were going to read it on the subway in your way into work.
Really?
People would kind of, well, maybe it's a British thing, but if you were reading kind of things, with the kind of a face with an eyeball dangling out and a severed artery, you definitely have like two empty seats, even on a very, very crowded subway train. People would back away from you. So occasionally you might not want to read those things in public, which is these days every horror piece of fiction has a very tasteful cover, which doesn't give anything away about the content inside.
Yeah.
And
why do we need to have tasteful covers? It's horror, you know. It's
they want to feel special.
Did you say you came in at the mid 90s or mid noughties, as in like 2006?
I was a journalist throughout the 90s, and my first fictional work actually that I sold, I made a living throughout most of the noughties as a comic writer. My first novel was published in 2005.
Okay.
I jumped from being a comic writer to being a comic writer and an author. And
what
then,
kind of comics did you?
Yeah, what comics?
I wrote for European comics, so things like 2000 AD, which is the home of Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog.
Okay.
And also, I wrote a lot of comics for the Warhammer universe.
Okay.
They had a big publishing arm, and I wrote comics for New Line Cinema things. I wrote comics for a lot of DreamWorks, and I basically wrote any kind of comic that was going from small kids comics to adult comics. I did do stuff for the Panini used to do a Marvel UK. They would produce Marvel characters that were aimed at a slightly younger audience for the European market. So I got to write Daredevil and Fantastic Four, but those were never on sale in the States.
So does that mean that they're not like in continuity? Technically, they're not canon.
Yeah, we had to follow canon, but yeah, it would anything that we wrote, kind of, you can't mess with the universe. You're kind of playing in someone else's sandpit and with their toys, and you have to leave it exactly as you found it. So I couldn't suddenly restore Matt Murdock's sight or cure Ben Grimm, or if I did, I had to completely fix it and send it right back by the end of by the final panel.
Retcon as they go. So you said Daredevil and Fantastic Four were
those are characters I had a huge good fortune to play with. But I said that was done for Panini. They're a European publishing company. I think they're originally Italian, but they do a lot of stuff over here. I got to write Doctor Who comics as well for the Doctor Who magazine, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Who would have been the Doctor at that time, or did you just write whichever Doctor era you felt like writing for?
The first Doctor I wrote was Paul McGann. That was a very long time ago, and then
he barely got any time on the production on the stage.
I did write a David Tennant story and a Matt Smith story, and then the editor changed. And as often happens with these things, they didn't accept him on scripts from me.
Who's your favorite Doctor?
It's a toss-up because I'm old enough to remember the first series between Tom Baker and David Tennant, I would say.
Tom Baker and David Tennant? That's what you're going with? See, everybody likes those two guys.
Is that a litmus test or something? What's going on, Jeremy?
Well, because I never like watched Doctor Who religiously, but it has enough backstory that I love to like go down that rabbit hole sometimes and just read it. I don't have to love something in order to research it, is what I mean. You know, if there's enough backstory there, I'm good enough with that. And so I'll go back and read over, you know, like, oh, what was going on, you know, from with these people's anecdotes who worked on Doctor Who in this era, or, you know, what happened where this plot contradicted this other plot. I love to hear people talk about things I have no idea what they're talking about, but you can hear their love in it, you know. And so I've picked up a lot of knowledge about Doctor Who along the way just by watching other Who fans argue with each other.
I'm probably the same. I'm never exactly a huge Doctor Who fan. And the fact that when I got to write the character, there were a lot of my kind of friends who were huge fans who were massively jealous. And for me, it was really just another paycheck. It was a nice way to kind of pay the mortgage that month.
Right.
Well, getting back to the comic thing, and then I'll let you, Gregor and Ben, I'll let you guys, because I know I've probably been hogging the airtime or whatever. But as far as the comics, yeah, let's go back into that for a minute. Like, did you get to create any original characters was that a complicated process to get to clear an original character that you may wanted to include, or?
Not when I was working for people like 2000 AD. There I was able to create a lot of original characters. I also done quite a few graphic novels with the comic publisher Marcosia, and I created a lot of original characters for Silver Phoenix Entertainment, who are a leading American indie publisher. So working for certain publishers, you've got a completely clear kind of like slate to do whatever you want. When you're employed to work on someone else's franchise, you can create new characters, but one, you're working on a work for hire basis, so anything you create they own anyway, and so if they wanted to use a character again, they'd have full rights to. So you don't want to kind of give them your best work. And secondly, mostly if you are creating new characters, they're probably only going to appear in your story, and they're only probably going to serve that particular plot.
Right.
So your characters are going to move on from that particular planet and leave all that behind.
What? Give me an example of a Fantastic Four storyline that you handled.
I wrote one in which Reed Richards was messing about with some wild science, and actually set a 20-minute timer whereby all of they kept swapping each other's powers. So they would remain physically the same, but suddenly the Thing actually had Mr. Fantastic's power and could stretch into ridiculous things, and Mr. Fantastic would start turning invisible, and Sue Storm would start bursting into flame, and then this would swap and swap and swap. And when he actually worked out what he'd done, he realized he could probably cure Ben, but unfortunately Ben then had to, as in this man, sacrifice himself, and could have become a real man, but that would have put everyone else in jeopardy. So he went back to being the Thing and sacrificed himself in order that kind of things went back to exactly as they were at the end of this particular storyline.
Okay. So Dr. Doom wasn't in it?
No, I would have loved to have written Dr. Doom, but no, let me write that particular character in.
That's too bad.
I think probably the best Dr. Doom writing was done by Warren Ellis, though.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you enjoy the works of Warren Ellis. I just got done reading first volume of Injection. Have you read that? I
haven't read that yet. Is it worth a read?
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, I've not finished all 3 volumes yet. I just finished the first volume. I thought it was excellent.
Most things by Warren Ellis are absolutely superb.
Yeah, I've only read this and then a novel that he wrote, Crooked Little Vein. Have you read that?
I haven't read that. If you're reading kind of Warren Ellis, though, massively recommend Transmetropolitan. That's absolutely
that I've read the first collection of that. Yeah, this guy comes down off the mountain after he's burned through all of his advance money. He was this like major hipster writer and a award-winning, like world-class journalist, but he burned through all his advance money. He shaves off his beard, that hangs to the floor, and his long hair cuts that off, and he starts to battle the world leaders at the time. They were extremely corrupt, and people are like, "Oh, it's a return to form." It was a really good story. What I've read of it so far,
and it gets better and better and better. And Planetary is the other thing that's absolutely art by John Cassidy, and this is a group of archaeologists who are studying superhero culture, and just his ideas, his characterization are absolutely awesome. So massively recommend those two out of all the stuff he's done.
Planetary and Transmetropolitan is what you say?
Yeah, totally unmissable if you like comics.
Okay, yeah, I do. Yeah, and I especially like Dr. Doom.
Yeah, the Doom 2099 was one of the earliest things he did when he was quite a young man, and that's really superb.
I'll have to take a look.
Now, there's another book here of yours that has caught my attention. I'm the biggest book whore. I will read anything, but this I probably would have read this. Even if I did have discriminating tastes, which I don't. Way of the Barefoot Zombie. What's the deal with this?
It's set on it's not a zombie apocalypse. It's actually set on a private island out in the Caribbean that's so private. It's actually taken off all maps. It's not even included on sonar, and it's owned by a super rich, basically voodoo houngan who actually has a captive colony of zombies, and he runs retreats for the would-be super rich. And he practices the way of the barefoot zombie, which is basically you get to go and live alongside zombies. You get to act like zombies and think like a zombie and interact with zombies in order that you can free your inner zombie and become a killer. So in order to go and make a killing on the market, you first learn how actually have to become a killer. And so the world's aspiring super rich sign up to go and visit this island and undergo this mystical transformation where they will become the new elite. And as this is going on, there's also a group of would-be anarchists who call themselves the Zombie Liberation Front. And they're going there to free the zombies who they see as the noble monster. And they don't like them being enslaved in this hideous way by this capitalist. So when the two of those things collide, everything just explodes on this island. And it's so it's going back to the kind of the voodoo roots of zombie fiction.
David Gregor, I would
recommend you go on YouTube and just Google Where the Barefoot Zombie, because I have some I have a few promos, video promos that I did for that back in the day, and I can promise you, you won't have seen anything quite like them.
So you actually are, these zombies are actually voodoo zombies, which is
Yes.
something that doesn't seem to get much attention. So that's kind of cool.
I just kind of wanted to take a slightly different take and to take zombie fiction in a slightly different direction.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you don't see that much voodoo zombie action going on, so it's cool that you chose that take on them.
Yeah, I kind of missed that.
Yeah.
And I took the time to go and actually find some genuine practitioners of voodoo,
Mm-hmm.
and various houngans and mambos. Got in touch with them. Some quite high level people over in New Orleans, and some practitioners of Santeria. So they were able to actually kind of school me a little bit to make certain that the voodoo that I use is all authentic.
Oh, that's cool.
And the weird thing was as well, because voodoo call themselves the servants of the lower, or the
Right.
Orisha. And that's like their kind of little pantheon. And the weird thing was is whenever I got to the point where I'd have like a ritual in the book, and one of these lows would turn up, it was a little bit like I was kind of tapped on the shoulder. I kind of move over, and I would also be automatic writing. Whenever one of those deities actually appeared, they would almost write their own dialogue. You could almost hear them in my head dictating automatically. So there's probably something in it, I would say.
Very well could be.
Or it just could be that I was particularly undergoing some form of dissociative identity disorder, but that's kind of just a common, hazard as an author. You do spend a lot of time alone in a room with yourself, listening to voices inside your head. So take
Exactly.
it. It's either mental illness or full-on voodoo.
Are you? Well, one thing that I heard about voodoo from someone who wasn't an all-out poser with it. Like, I've got a voodoo doll. That's like basic bitch version of voodoo, right? There's more to it than that. What I heard though was that at least in some cultures that practice it, that it's not about like the doll itself. It's something to do with I don't even know. Okay,
It's the basis is it's what you would call a syncretistic religion. So it's marrying a lot of ancient African beliefs that traces its way back to a part of Africa called Dahomey. I think that's how you pronounce it. And these came over in the slave ships, and they were all partly converted to Catholicism. So it took a lot of Catholic beliefs, and it took a lot of ancient African beliefs and married them to make a new religion. And so a lot of the old ancient African deities have continued, either they're referred to as saints, particularly by New Orleans voodoo, or spirits, or lower, or Orisha. And these are kind of like the intermediaries between us as a human race and God. God is a very remote figure. It's very, very difficult to actually talk to. And although we can petition him with the power of prayer, it's difficult to get an answer. What the Orisha do is they actually directly interact with their followers, even to the degree that they will sometimes, it's called riding. They will actually possess the bodies of their followers and talk to their followers. So this is why you have the drums and you have the dancing, because it puts you into a trance-like state. And occasionally the lower, the Orisha, will actually enter the body of their followers and talk and give all sorts of information. And they will grant boons and they will grant blessings. And sometimes this is a very spiritual, self-improving nature, and which is sometimes referred to as Radha voodoo, and sometimes as Petro voodoo, which is seen as slightly less beneficent, slightly more malevolent. That will give you power over people and an ability to hurt and curse people. And so there's a whole gamut of spiritual practice and religious practice that is encompassed by the voodoo. And I'm not an expert. I've just spoken to people who are, and they've educated me to a basic layman's degree.
So Crystal Lake is run out of South America?
South Africa.
South Africa. Yeah, it's I think it's on the east coast of South Africa, Bloemfontein. And Joe runs it there, but he has an international connection that he works with. And there are a few South African people, and he even actually publishes some work in Afrikaans purely for the South African audience. But he, the great actual thing about them as publishers is that it's a company that's founded by horror fans. They live, breathe, and eat this stuff. And it founded for horror fans. And one of the things they do is build communities, whether it's around their online presence, whether it's their new website, which has just been launched about a month ago, which is very worth going checking out, whether it's all the competitions they run, like the Shallow Waters, the Flash Fiction competition, or whether it's interaction at a much deeper level on things like their Patreon page and the exclusive access that you get to writers and editors of a huge nature.
Okay.
So it's a very international organization because horror is an international community.
Well, I'm surprised you guys haven't done any work with Chris Seknussemm. Does that name ring a bell?
That doesn't. You have to educate me on that.
Okay, he wrote. Let's see, what has he written? Enigmatic.
I don't know. Chris doesn't really write straight horror.
No, he doesn't write horror. But what I mean, does Crystal Lake only publish horror though? I mean,
no, their remit is anything that's kind of like dark and a bit sinister, and kind of, yeah, basically explores the darker side of human nature.
Hang on, is this the real Ann Sturzinger?
Yeah, it is. I just haven't turned my camera on yet.
Okay.
So I'm trying to see if my
wow, you're early.
internet can handle the load.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to go.
But nice talking.
I didn't get.
No, I'm kidding. I don't have to go.
Okay.
Yeah. He would have to go if I had turned my camera on, though.
Yeah, that's right.
What? Have you just got the shower?
Apparently, I think he's referring to the inside joke that Anne would only show up when he was not around, and vice versa at some point.
Because you're secretly the same person.
Well, I think we can debunk that now. I don't know, unless they talk over each other. See, he just muted. So yeah, maybe. But so this is one of our other co-hosts that just popped in, Ann Sturzinger. And we've been talking with Jasper Bark here, who writes, in the horror genre, like really dark, fanciful, fantastical, cosmic horror type stuff. You're familiar with that term, cosmic horror, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
He doesn't write in that genre as much as he writes in the just with the kind of almost a spider-punk genre, right? Jasper?
Have you done Spider-Punk?
I kind of marry a lot of different genres.
Oh,
okay.
So there's a lot of splatterpunk elements. There's some folk horror in some of my work. There's some quiet horror in some of my work, and there's some nasty extreme stuff. And there's a lot of cosmic stuff in there as well. I'm a huge fan of all elements of the genre, so I love to marry all of my passions in the fiction that I write.
So what the reason I brought up Chris Newsom a minute ago is that he actually lived in either South America or South Africa, but in a deep, like, green and inferno jungle type habitat for at least a year. And I mean, I think he even married into a tribe. Ben, help me with this.
Wow, how cool is that?
Is this accurate information? I know that he lived with a tribe. Did he actually marry into?
I don't know. I know that he taught in an African university for a while.
No, but he actually lived in a jungle environment with natives. I mean, he's talked about it several times when I've interviewed him. And then he came back to civilization and saw how, the shocking differences and realized, how spoiled and dulled since we are.
I've traveled in Africa. My wife grew up in South Africa. So I've kind of traveled the length of that particular country. I've been on safari. I've gone out and actually worked in mission schools out there, and I've helped out in soup kitchens in tiny shanty towns and townships. So
no, when you say mission schools, so is that like a religious school?
There were schools that were set up by missionaries, kind of like in the last century, and a lot of them were closed down. But since the death of apartheid and the rise of the ANC, which is the African National Congress, who are now the ruling party in South Africa, they've been opened up again. So I was able to. And those sort of incidents, those sort of life events, really do force you to check your privilege. I mentioned earlier on, I'm the son of river gypsies. I come from a very lower working class blue collar background here in the UK. But even the level of poverty I saw in this country was as nothing to what I went out to go and see in Africa. So it does make you very aware of how privileged you are. And it does give you, it gives you a reality check with regards to the first world problems that you wrestle with every day, which are as nothing to people who have to walk miles to go and get a simple glass of fresh water, or count themselves considerably lucky if they've gotten through that one day without being sexually assaulted. So you really and actually it was that particular journey in which I went and met Joe Meinhardt for the very first time. I'm probably the only person he's published who's traveled halfway around the world to actually come and spend time with him and his lovely wife.
Oh, wow. Okay. What? So no Zach tonight, huh, Gregor?
That is correct.
Okay, that's all right. I'm sure Regina will. So, and that's okay. So anyway, I'm fighting with my cat over the speaker. She's trying to knock it down, and I'm trying to keep it up. Anyway.
Nobody wants a critic.
Yeah.
Especially our feline friends.
She's like, make it stop. I don't want to hear anymore.
You sure sucks, Dad.
While we're talking about Crystal Lake, can I mention a couple of competitions? They have got their ongoing Shallow Waters fiction competition, which I mentioned before, but they also have a big poetry contest planned for 2021 with a big ass cash prize, which is way more than you normally get publishing a poem, even with the top publisher. And that's going to be judged by Linda D. Addison and Alessandro Manzetti, who are two Stoker Award-winning poets. So they seriously know their stuff. So okay. I'm plugging all this stuff because Joe's kind of giving me a briefing, like mentioning all this.
Okay. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, those are the kind of main things. And also, please do go and check out. I also mentioned before, they've got a brand spanking new website. It's only been up about a month. And it also, if you want to buy any of their books as an ebook, You can now buy them directly from the publisher. So 100% of the profits go directly to the publisher. And that means 50% of the profits go to the people who wrote them, as opposed to through Amazon, who take a great chunk of every sale price.
What is it, like 75, 80%? Or
I think it depends. It's about
it depends on the price of the book, right? So I mean, if it's 99 cents, it's like 30. They give you 35% or something to that effect, or 30.
Effectively, and then as an author who works with publishers, I don't self-publish. You then split that,
right?
And put them out with the publisher. It mounts up eventually.
But if it's like $2.99, between $2.99 and $9.99 for the ebook price, you get they take 30, and I think you get 70%.
It depends on each. Also, it depends on the deal that you cut with them, whether you're exclusive or whether you're not. They try and incentivize you on that.
Right.
Lines as well. So it's anywhere between like 70 to 35%, depending on what deal you've got with them.
Right.
But I don't actually handle that side of the publishing, so I'm not the most knowledgeable. I just look at my royalty statements.
Right.
And cry. Nowhere.
Yeah, but that's basically what it is, Jeremy. If it's like under $2.99, they take the lion's share, right? But between $2.99 and $9.99, the author gets 70%.
Yeah, you get a little bit more, but again, it's also and you have to balance that off, incentivizing people to buy your work, because there's a lot of people are quite used to paying quite low prices for an ebook. So until you've actually put them into your work, they expect things, at a 99 cent to kind of $2.99 kind of price bracket for entry-level publishers they're taking a risk on. So.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, but we're only talking about Kindle books at this point, Jeremy. I mean, if you're going to self-publish or something through KDP and you're doing a print book, it's entirely different.
Okay. It is. Sometimes the margins are much smaller on that, though. Actually,
much smaller. Yeah,
because you've got all the print costs.
Right. Exactly.
Associated too. Whereas you're kind of once you've kind of created the text with an ebook, from there on in, everything is clear profit.
Right.
Technically.
Right.
How do you guys feel about the Giants transition from physical legacy publishing to mostly ebooks sales? I
don't think it's mostly ebooks yet, is it? Or am I behind on that? I didn't think it was mostly ebooks yet.
Till about 2017, ebooks were the largest growing area, but recently, weirdly, physical book sales have had a bit of a renaissance.
Right.
They've been growing and booming. I think that the whole pandemic has been very, very good for ebooks because people want them straight away and can't go out to bookshops or necessarily don't want to wait for it to kind of come through the mail. Yeah,
I think it depends on the genre as well, right? So I mean, like, I think horror and like erotica and things like that sell really well in ebooks, especially science fiction that does really well in ebook as well. But I think like if you're talking about contemporary fiction or literary fiction, things like that, I think those still sell really well in the paper form.
I think they do. And graphic novels are much easier to read in proper book form on your Kindle. I don't like the Kindle reader but I think it's as a reader, I think if you grew up reading books, there's something about the tactile feel of paper and the smell of either an old book, which has been much loved, a secondhand book, or a new book, that kind of really crisp, clean, chemical smell.
I mean, I love a real book, right? And especially, but I read mostly ebooks now. But some things I really prefer to have an actual physical copy, like a graphic novel or a comic book, or especially a tabletop role playing game manual. Those you have to have in a hard copy. Yeah,
you have to have that proper large kind of tone feeling,
right?
Forbidden raw.
Right.
I completely agree. And sometimes I think if you've really absolutely loved an ebook, you kind of want to have a physical copy of it to put on your bookshelf.
Oh yeah.
Unless you don't have room on your bookshelves anymore, which is the case with me. I mean,
There's always room. I live in total denial. My entire life. Luckily, my wife is also a bibliophile, so I'm constantly trying to build or find new shelf space to house books. The great thing about Kindle, of course, is when I used to go on vacation with my wife, I would fill half my suitcase with books that I wanted to read. These days, it's been totally banned. So I just bring my tiny little Kindle Paperwhite with me.
Wait, what's totally banned?
A bookcase. I mean, a suitcase full of books.
Suitcase
Are they really?
on vacation?
No, his wife has banned it.
Oh, okay.
She had a point. It's nice to kind of wear something while you're away.
Right.
And I would kind of go, and then I would visit bookshops while I was away, and I'd buy books, and so we come back with even more books, and I still do that. But at least I kind of some space because I brought my Kindle to sit by the pool reading.
So do you do audiobooks as well as physical and ebooks?
Yeah, I've recorded a couple of audiobooks because I used to be, as well as being a journalist, prior to being an author, I also did quite a bit of stand-up and bits of cable TV presenting as well over here in the UK. So I've done a few of my own books as audiobooks, and I've got a few books out with some amazingly talented people. The aforementioned Stuck on You is done by Joe Hempel, which is really, really good. So
Joe Hempel's an author as well, right?
I don't know if Joe is an author, actually. Maybe he is. He's certainly a very talented audiobook performer.
Okay. Any relation to Amy Hempel?
I don't know. He could.
Maybe that's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I haven't asked him. There is one audiobook performer called Chet Williamson, who goes way back, mentioning all the kind of leisure zebra books, way back to kind of like the 80s horror.
He's been on here before.
He's got the most amazing voice, actually, and I've got so many audiobooks on Audible read by him. He just seems to read most of my favorite authors. And audiobooks are another, I think, I started listening to audiobooks because it was a way of reading more books. So when I'm kind of working out or when I'm doing housework and stuff, and usually your mind's just going blank. These days, I just download an audiobook and listen to that. So I'm reading a graphic novel and a kind of an ebook, probably have a physical book going. And then I'm also listening at the same time to an audiobook for a couple of hours a day.
Do you think that's you think that's going to grow into a lucrative market? I mean, or
audiobooks?
Yeah.
Oh, they're already a huge market.
It is.
Yeah. It's massively expanding. A lot of people are coming to it. Some people find it difficult due to all kinds of different learning difficulties to necessarily concentrate on a page. Some people have problems with their eyesight. As we all get older, that kind of deteriorates. And so ebooks have been quite good for that because you can control the print. But audiobooks, they've actually done tests on people's brain. Listening to a story being told to you actually activates the same parts of your brain as reading does. And it's hands-free. You can be listening to it in your car. You can listen to it while you're commuting. You can listen to it while you're exercising, going for a walk, taking the dog for a walk. It's a great way of filling those empty gaps in your thing without necessarily having to stare at your phone or, gaze off into space. You can be told a story.
Audiobooks have kind of exploded in popularity because I do remember like books on tape being a thing when I was a kid, but there was a little bit, it was a little bit prohibitive because there'd be like 3 or 4 cassettes with them, and
you have to get a suitcase full of cassettes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have about 20 different things you have to keep taking it out again.
Right.
And a long car journey, you'd be, where's the next bit? I've got this one, but what happens to this middle bit? I can't find it. So yeah, there was a particularly good one of The Mist, I remember.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That was done, and it was like this kind of surround sounds, and it was
like 3D sound. Yeah.
That was superb. That was really, really good. And you could listen to that on your Walkman, and you really were right in the middle of the action. But that was about the only thing I really remember at that time, kind of with regards to audiobooks.
Yeah, because that was like also a shorter one too, so it didn't seem like it wasn't on very many cassettes, Yeah,
it was a C90. It fit on both sides, didn't it?
Well, I think that you're talking a different format than what we had here in the States.
Sorry, that was what it would have been in the UK.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember that distinctly from when I was a kid listening to that. And that was great.
Yeah, that was a superb piece of fiction. It's a great story as well.
Yeah.
So Crystal Lake is not open to submissions right now, but so there are no anthologies in the works currently then, I guess, right?
There are 2 new anthologies coming out towards the end of the year. And as you can also be part of one of the Shallow Waters books, which is an ongoing competition. They run every single month. And whenever you win that, you'll not just get published in the anthology, you'll get a very nice top industry rate pay for that. If you're a runner.
Oh no.
I didn't do anything. That's all right.
You kicked him out, man.
No, I didn't. I didn't kick him in. I kicked him out. What makes you say that? There he is.
Okay, sorry. My goat just fell over from exhaustion. With a stick.
That's
so
what,
like,
you have a backup goat.
With Stonehenge, we've kind of got like BC level kind of broadband levels. We're almost big man up here. I have to go and like wave a crystal over a virgin stomach, and just in order to kind of like get online.
So yeah, you said you live like how far away from a working like line?
Anything.
Yeah,
I've got a well that works in the back garden for running water. No, I mean, working. I'm slightly exaggerating. I do live out in a very rural space, and so the broadband here is not as good as it is in an urban environment.
What do you do if you have to? What do you do if you need? You're in need of an ambulance, or God forbid, you know? I mean,
we have those. So there's I'm near enough to the city of Bath that they can send one from there. Come and get me.
Okay. So you were talking about anthologies and Crystal Lake. You had 2 that were coming out soon.
That's why, yes, you can enter the flash fiction. They have got I've got some notes here that are sent me by Joe. So they're also going to be doing a fundraiser around March and April to give pro author rates for the 2 new anthologies they're going to be releasing this year. They will be open again to submissions sometime around the middle of 2021. They kind of because they get such a huge number of submissions, and they've only got a small team of 5 people trying to read 2,000 manuscripts. They open for about a 3-month period, and then they spend about 6 months reading them all. And they have some regular authors they're bringing out. I'm about to sometime next year. I'm going to release a trilogy of books under the general heading of Draw You In, which covers the history of horror comics as well as cosmic horror and the secret history of the USA. That's coming out.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. What is that now? Is that a fictional account?
It's both a fictional and a non-fictional account. As I mentioned, my love of horror comics, and horror comics are quite a fascinating form because they're just about the only literary or artistic pursuit that was ever banned. In my country, in the UK, they actually passed a bill in Parliament to ban horror comics for a brief period of time.
Video nasties like that, right?
Yeah.
So what would you call it?
I think that isn't that what set the comics code in place in the US?
While you were having, and again, there was the during the 50s, Bill Gaines and all the horror publishers. There was an amazing boom of just astonishingly great horror comics,
right?
And they kept pushing the envelope to the degree that there was that giant pushback. There's Estes Kefauver, who was a senator and a presidential hopeful at one point. He ran with Barry Goldwater for vice president against Richard Nixon. And he became famous for having a series of televised hearings with originally mobsters. And then he was looking about for a new kind of mission statement and a new cause. And he hit upon juvenile delinquency. And at that point, this is slightly before rock and roll, the big thing for teens at that point was reading horror comics. And so they became the core celeb. People would have bonfires and burn horror comics, and all these great. Frederick Wertham, who was a psychologist, and actually a former member of the Communist Party. He wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, pointing out how horror comics absolutely warp the minds of young children, and it was turning them into automatons and killers, and this is the most deadly threat to humanity since Nazism. And so, yeah, horror comics were effectively banned.
I mean, that's what started the comic code in the U.S., I believe, is the reaction to the horror comics, right?
The publishers got together, and in the same way that the Hays Code was introduced in America in the 1940s to stop censorship, state censorship of movies, the publishers got together in the late 50s and created the Comics Code Authority to
police themselves, essentially.
But boy, did they ever police themselves. And unfortunately, the standard and quality of comics drops right off a cliff, and it doesn't really start to come back until Stan Lee and Jack Kirby start reviving the superhero again in the early 60s and give birth to the Marvel boom. And then later, horror comics came back at the end of the 60s as black and white comics with publishers like Warren Comics, and then Skyward, and then Marvel jumped on the bandwagon, and horror kind of snuck back in there. And DC used to do the kind of things like the House of Mystery and the House of Secrets, which wasn't really horror; it was just kind of mysterious. And the book itself charts the career of a forgotten horror artist from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And this character is right at the center of a giant cosmic and political conspiracy. And our particular protagonists explore his backstory and his history and uncover the secret history of the United States. And they go on a giant road trip. And
that's called Draw Me In?
Draw You In.
Draw You In, okay. And that's a trilogy of books?
It's going to come out as 3 books initially, and then it'll all be collected. So the 3 books will appear first in hardcovers and then in ebooks, and then eventually there'll be a collected.
Is it going to be illustrated?
There will be illustrations, and we have got a lot of fascinating and exciting promotional activity around this, which unfortunately I at the moment can't say too much about.
Okay.
But again, it will be something you haven't quite read before.
Now, this isn't available for pre-order yet.
Nope, because I'm actually still writing the manuscript, even as we speak.
How far along are you into it?
Just finishing up the second draft, and so it's going to be going off to the editors.
Okay, so you're through with all 3 of the books as far as the writing. Okay.
Yep, and it's about 250,000 words at the moment, which it wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be 1 book, but it kind of grew a bit like a kind of small piece of protoplasm on an irradiated kind of petri dish in a mad scientist laboratory. It just wouldn't stop.
So it's a combination. It actually references like true humans and history of the genre, but you've mixed in some your original lore and characters.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So and
kind of like a Cavalier and Clay kind of.
Hugely. In fact, I pitched it to Crystal Lake as Cavalier and Clay meets Clive Barker.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm definitely down for reading that when that comes out. So.
Thank you. And it does for the horror comic what Cavalier and Clay did for the kind of golden age of superhero fiction.
Right. That sounds great.
And it's such a fascinating, rich, amazing period of artistic history, and it's not been explored enough.
No, that sounds really good.
Thank you.
Is this one of those deals where someone points to like how the layout of Washington D.C. it if you look at it from like overhead looks like it forms a pentagram? Is it one of those type of?
There's all kinds of that stuff in it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And again, in the sense of I love great conspiracy novels. Everything from Foucault's Pendulum all the way through to Robert Anton Wilson's wonderful Illuminatus trilogy. I'm not necessarily directly into conspiracy theory, but as a modern form of mythology, it has so many rich veins.
Have you read Flicker?
Okay. Yes, by Theodore Rorschach. That's
Yeah,
another touchstone. That's another very, very similar book. It's very much in that type of vein. I love that book.
Yeah, because Jeremy and I are big fans of Flickr. Yeah.
Now you said what's like Flickr? Draw
book
me.
he's writing, draw you in.
It kind of and it does for horror comics what Flickr does for Max Castle, I believe is the famous forgotten filmmaker in this.
Right.
So it does for horror comics what Flickr does for film and film theory. So yeah, very much in that vein of novel. I love novels that invent characters from artistic history that should have existed. There's another great novel called Apartment 16 by Adam Neville that has a fabulous painter, almost a kind of Lovecraftian figure who paints blasphemous forgotten landscapes. And he does such like Rorschach does. I think that's how you pronounce his name, isn't it? Theodore Rorschach, or
I think so.
Yeah, what he does for the way that he actually creates this herb, and you almost think by the end of the novel that you've actually watched one of his films. Adam Neville does the same thing in Apartment 16 for this painter who's now I've slightly forgotten. And again, you think, and you're just desperate to go online and look up this character and find out more about his work, and then you realize, unfortunately, it only exists within the confines of this novel. So I would hope that Draw You In will do the same thing for the horror comics it speaks about.
Some of the title Draw You In isn't the best part of the concept as far as I'm concerned, right? I mean, it's an all right title, but it seems as if
you think it needs to be more work. There is a lost work in the middle of it all, which is called Tales That Draw You In, and we're playing on the idea of drawing you in and drawing you in.
Right. I mean, I get that joke. I mean, that wordplay or whatever. I'm just I'm saying that.
A teeny bit more I mean, obviously, it's not been published yet, so I might have to thank you in the acknowledgement, saying thanks for making me fix that title.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't read it, so I couldn't tell you what an alternate title would be, right? But it just doesn't seem to have the gravitas, right? That concept seems to command, right? That's my thinking, right? It's too. I don't know. It just doesn't sound horror comic-y at all, you know?
I do know. And I've read, titles are always the most difficult part. Titles in your opening chapter are the most difficult part about writing.
Well, yeah.
So maybe I will need to go back to the, excuse the pun, drawing board on this one.
Right. Well, just, give it some thought, because I don't know. My guess is there's probably more than one comics within the comic, but you're saying that the central comic within the narrative, right, is comics that draw you in. Is that what you said?
Tales that draw you in.
What's that? Tales
that draw you in.
Okay. And that's the central comic book line within this narrative?
That's one of the hidden works within the, and again, I'm not trying to give too much away because I want to
Okay. Well, that was just my feedback. Maybe it's annoying that I even said it, but I'm just telling you.
I'm at a stage in my career where I appreciate every single bit of feedback, and it's always useful. And so thank you for saying something about that. A lot of people just kind of would have gone, that sucks. But I won't say anything. But I appreciate it when people do take the time to give feedback and get in touch.
Well, you're welcome. So I am looking forward to reading that. That sounds like something that's exactly up my alley. So
fantastic. Maybe I can come back on the show when it's finally published and give it another plug.
I think that Jeremy would allow such a thing. He is the boss.
Yeah, you can come back. You can come back when you don't have anything to promote, whenever you want. But who's this? Somebody. Oh yeah. That this guy's referencing something I said down in the title notes. I'll get to that in a minute. But you're welcome to come back anytime. I mean, you could even be a regular contributor if you wanted to, like, weighing in on certain subjects when something's in the news related to this or that. I mean, I don't care. I mean, I think it could only lend us, undeserved credibility for you to be in the mix with us.
Thank you, man. Can I just say, well, I have to actually come clean and say I am a CIA shill.
Okay.
We have a little comment.
We accept all kinds.
You're not a very good one because you're not a very good
CIA shill because basically they wouldn't have me in the FBI.
Oh, well, you're
MI6 wouldn't have you either.
That's what I was about to say. Wouldn't it
See, I didn't go to a private school, and unfortunately, you have to. So I wasn't the right school.
The CIA will just take any asshole off the street as long as you're willing to, I don't know, lie and kill black people.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, you know, we don't have standards in my country.
But yeah, so I feel like the interview's winding down. But Anne, did you have anything to ask him? Anne, you still with us?
Yeah,
Just
sorry, I
muted for
had my mic muted. Not really. I'm not familiar with his work, but I'll try to get my damaged brain to hang on to his name. Sorry, I'm having another week.
As usual, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jasper, thank you for joining us. What can you tell us on a on a closing note? What would you like to convey that maybe you haven't about Crystal Lake Publishing? I envisioned me coming into this more researched, but again, I dozed off and lost an hour. So
I would say go check out the website. Go check out the Patreon page. If you're a reader, then you'll be joining a community of very like-minded people, and you'll be introduced to some amazing dark fiction. You don't have to read my work. There's a lot of amazing other amazing authors that they publish who are really very well worth your time, attention, and money. And check out a few of their books on Amazon. Pretty much everything they publish is well worth a look, whether it's anthologies or novels or collections of individual authors. It's all good.
wow. Okay, well, thank you for joining us, sir. And
yeah, thank you. Nice meeting you.
I think you did an adequate job representing your your associates. And
I think you did a stellar job of representing his associates.
And I am curious to read the one with the tentative working title of "Draw You In." When it
wasn't tentative until he got on this show.
I think he's right. I think he's right, though, that you need something more with a more dramatic flair.
I think you might be right, actually, and so I will take your advice on that.
Like,
I'm looking for it.
Yeah.
No, don't give him any. Just leave him with that, right? Let him do the wool gathering on it, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Well, thank you, sir, and
thank you.
We'll be in touch.
I certainly will be.
All right.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.
Mighty welcome.
We should now, if everything works out, we should have some more people joining us in the next hour. Unless I don't know though, because it's been a weird night. Most of the regular faces I'm not seeing yet, but I had lined up a few possible guests to follow, and I'm not sure what happened.
He just dropped. I mean,
yeah,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, there he is.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
I'm back. So I was just kind of leaving.
Okay,
that's fine. I thought one of our viewers had gotten into the chat, is what I thought. Okay, you're good. You're good.
All right, thank you. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I love the way that someone sneaking onto the air with us is always